Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Presents is the USC Price School's premier webinar series about issues confronting society that shape our daily lives. Each webinar features experts from not only the USC Price School, but across USC, as well as those from other universities, government, business, and not-for-profits. Today's discussion, titled Mending Metro, will be moderated by Genevieve Giuliano, Distinguished Professor, and Margaret and John Ferraro Chair in Effective Local Government at the USC Price School. Though the audience will not be able to ask questions verbally, we encourage you to submit questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and panelists will respond to as many as possible. Now, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Professor Genevieve Giuliano.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this first of the fall Price Presents webinar. We're very happy to be able to host it. We have an interesting topic today that you heard about. We're going to be looking at the issue of crime on LA Metro system. And I have a really great panel here to help us out. Let me just, by alphabetical order, introduce our panelists. So I'm going to start with Jim McDonnell, who is the director of the USC Price Safe Communities Institute and the former LA County Sheriff. He has over 40 years of public safety experience and now leads the Safe Communities Institute in its mission to reach people with a new understanding of public safety. So I want to welcome you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Next is Gina Osborn, who joins us as the Chief Safety Officer at LA Metro. She tells me she's something of a newbie at Metro. However, she's had quite the stellar career in law enforcement, including being at one point as FBI special agent. She's had 20 years of experience and is an active public speaker and news contributor. Our third panelist is Rachel Uranga. She writes for the LA Times in the area of transportation and mobility. And it was actually her reporting on crime at LA Metro that was the inspiration for hosting this seminar. So thanks very much, Rachel, for giving us the idea. Now I want to launch right into it. I see that there are still people joining, so this is great, but let's launch right into it for now. I'd like to start with Gina. I'd like her to give us a little bit of background on LA Metro. Not everybody who is on this webinar today knows the details, but LA Metro, I believe, is the second largest transit agency in the entire United States. And Gina, could you just give us some kind of basic numbers of LA Metro's activities here in LA County?
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gina Osborn, the Chief Safety Officer for LA Metro, and I'll tell you a little bit about Metro. We have a very, very large system, very, very complex system. We have 107 rail stations, and we have 2,500 buses or more traveling throughout our county in any given day. We are expanding. Over the last year, we expanded and we opened up our regional connector, and that connects Long Beach all the way to Azusa through downtown. We also opened up our K line. Safety and security, if anybody reads Rachel's reporting, you will know that we do face some challenges, and we recognize that. However, over the last year, we have worked very, very hard in an effort to make our system safe for not only for our riders, but for our employees as well. So I just would like to throw out a little numbers about where we're at. Back in February, we started a drug-free campaign. We had another supplemental campaign on the Red Line. And so between in May, crime decreased 53% on our rails and 13% on our buses. In June, it was down another 20% on our rail. And as far as ridership is concerned, we've been increasing our ridership month over month for the last 8 consecutive months. Our ridership is up 14% since last July. With regard to weekend travel, we are 96% from where we were before the pandemic and 73% pre-pandemic on our weekdays. We recognize that a lot of people have not returned to work, but we are still working very hard to not only increase our safety, but increase our ridership as well.
Thanks, Gina. And the one number I think that we also should add to that is that ridership is roughly 900,000 per day, just to give people an idea of how much activity there is on the system. Now what I'd like to do is turn to the issue of crime itself and kind of see if we can sort of parse out what's going on and why this is perceived as such a serious problem. And I would like to start there with Jim. Jim, there's the fear, there's the actual crime, there's the fear of crime, there's the perception of crime. So can you tell us something from your view about what's caused this perception and what we might do about it?
Yes, sure, certainly. And thank you for having me on the panel. Excuse me. I believe that this is a critical issue for all of us as Angelenos, people who live in the region. As Gina said, it is a massive system, very complex. The answers to the problems can't be addressed in a soundbite. It is very nuanced, and it needs to be given the due attention that it deserves. Metro transit is not a luxury. It's not a convenience. It's a necessity for many of our residents of LA County to get to work, to get to and from school. And so when you look at the first job of government is to provide for the safety and security of its residents, Metro becomes a real priority then for all of us. So when we look at the problems on Metro and look at the problems on the streets surrounding the Metro system, what happens in one is going to happen in the other. So we have an ecosystem that has become somewhat dysfunctional and in large part enabled by some of the legislation that we've seen in recent years. So we talk about we need more police officers, we need more of a presence. All of these things are accurate. We do need all of that. For such a large system, we need to be able to have enough people to both provide a deterrent effect through visibility, but then also to be able to rapidly follow up, hold somebody accountable, and then hope as well that the rest of the system is going to work. And that relates to prosecution and then whatever outcomes are appropriate for the people who are involved in the system, whether that's drug abuse, whether that's criminal behavior or other issues that people face. If we're going to address the system in a holistic manner and benefit the public, then we need to do so seriously, and we need to provide adequate resources to do that, and certainly collaboration among all of the entities, both in the public safety side as well as service provider side, to be able to work together and get the solutions that we're very capable of here within the region.
You're bringing up a very interesting point that I'm going to come back to later, and that's actually the issue of the effectiveness of the policing from the point of view of the rules that drive it. So I will come back to that.
Right.
But what I'd like to do is push this a little bit further with Rachel. Rachel, you've had some, I think, very interesting insights on, the context in which we're kind of looking at crime on the system. The context is the larger society. And I think you had some interesting things to say about how all of this is kind of part of a context.
Sure. So, I guess I just want to start by saying the percent of crime on the system is not exorbitant. It's not very high when you look at it in the larger context of what's going on in the rest of the city. It's probably, I haven't broken down the percentages per 100,000, but it's probably pretty low. What you do see is you see a lot of nonviolent crimes on the system. If you're just like a casual user, that would not be out of the ordinary, whereas I think the violent crimes is not as frequent. And so when we're talking about a perception issue, I think people have a perception that there may be a lot more crime because you're seeing people who, may not have a home, may be unhoused. You're seeing people who are probably high, and that is not an infrequent experience. And I think for a lot of riders and a lot of riders that I talk to, that creates a sense of insecurity if they're seeing trash and then they read a report, trash and somebody on drugs, and then they read a report that a bus driver was attacked and stabbed. And so that makes it feel like violent crime is all around, even if you're not seeing it. And so, so I guess I just want to say that, I mean, when I wrote about it, I think the story that got the most attention was about a drug user who used the trains basically as a drug den, to go in there to smoke. And the way he told it to me, he was going from one stop to another to get his high and then come back. And people would frequently meet around that area. So as Gina said, there's been certain stations that they've tried to address these issues, and there's certain stations that I think there's higher levels of concern than other. But without a doubt, the train is a mobile, it's transit, it's mobile, right? So if you have it at one place, if somebody's jumping on in one place and using, they're probably going all around and using it like people use transit.
So basically your point is that, and I think I think Gina would agree that the actual crime rate is low, and has been low all along, but it's more about perceptions. And what you're saying is that there's all this sort of low grade activity that goes on that's not exactly a big offense, but actually has an effect on the environment. Is that special to Metro?
What do you mean? Well, no, I mean, look, there's a homeless crisis all over the city. I mean, what we saw, it rise 9% in the county. People, there's a fentanyl crisis, and you see that everywhere. But Metro is special in a lot of ways, because first of all, you're in an enclosed area. So if you're a rider, you're captive to whatever is happening there. It's not like a city street where you can drive by or take another route. It's you have to go into that location, and maybe you could avoid taking a train, one car, but then another car is going to come where you're going to have the same issue. And it was not infrequent. When I did some reporting to see families going in, I saw family going in there arm in arm, as if, holding on to each other to go into that. So there is like some anxiety when you don't have other options.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Gina, let me get back to you. You're the chief safety officer. So you're the one that has to figure out what the safety officers can and cannot do on the trains. Do you find the challenges that Jim was talking about in terms of being limited by larger state laws or local laws?
That is definitely part of it. I think the big challenge that we had coming out of the pandemic, during the pandemic, we didn't do fare enforcement or code enforcement. And so as a result of that, we've had to work very hard over the last 18 months in reestablishing what our code of conduct is, and the fact that if you come into our system, onto our trains or our buses, you need to be a destination traveler. So we're working very hard on removing non-destination travelers from our system, because we found back in January, I asked all of our law enforcement partners, LASD, Long Beach PD, and LAPD. Did I say it both in LASD? Yeah, all three of them. I asked them if they would tell me every time someone got arrested, if they could tell me if they had proof of fare. And probably 90-something% of the time, there was no proof of fare. So we are working hard now. We have our layered approach where we have our transit security ambassador, our transit security officers who are doing fare and code enforcement. We have our law enforcement officers that are responding to crime and preventing and deterring crime. So we have this layered approach that we're recognizing what the challenges are. And even our ambassadors, when you think about the feeling of safety, the transit ambassadors, they're not security officers. However, if they're there to answer your questions on how to get from point A to point B, and our system is clean, because cleanliness goes around it as well, then people are going to have that feeling of safety. So these are the things, that's how we're attacking the issues. And like I said, and it starts with making sure that everybody who comes on our system, they're there for the purpose of transportation.
So you're being successful in being able to enforce fare payment. And that's something that was within the purview of LA Metro. Okay. And that the layered approach kind of says we're going to prevent as much as we possibly can before it happens. And once it happens, then we're back in the problems I think that Jim had suggested or had been talking about. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the context. In other words, we've talked now about how there's a perception that the system is not safe. And it's probably, the perception is not the same as the actual safety of the system. And Rachel brought up one reason for why that might be, and that is that it's a closed system. Are there other situations? I mean, is this only because it's a closed system, or are people also feeling uncomfortable on the street, walking around? Is there a perception, fear of crime, kind of more broadly in Los Angeles? And maybe Jim, you'd have the best perception on that.
Sure. I think a big part of it is how unpredictable behavior is that we see on the streets. Last estimate I saw, we have about 65,000 unhoused people in Los Angeles County. Many of them have access to the metro system and are using it for shelter rather than transportation. But in addition then to the unpredictable behavior, the quality of life type stuff, loud music, people screaming at each other, people talking to themselves, standing up, walking around the closed system, as we called it. Unpredictable as far as what is this person capable of? What are they going to do? And is anybody going to help me? And I think that's the fear that people walk into. And you couple that then with other issues such as graffiti, human defecation, trash, vandalism. All of those things weigh into, and not only on the system, but in the area around the system and on the streets. And its disorder creates fear of crime as much as actual crime. And so as you're trying to decide, are you going to live in an area, or are you going to go and move to a city, or are you going to move your business to a city? If you have a perception, regardless of what the actual numbers show, you're probably not going to make the decision to support that decision. Likewise, when we talk about numbers on crime, when things are not being addressed to the public satisfaction, they stop reporting crime. So we base our stats on reported crime. Obviously, the things that are not reported, we don't report, we don't know about necessarily. And so as people have less confidence in the system, their reporting of crime and certainly disorder goes down. So when we try and look and measure one period of time to another, we also have to include in that analysis, has there been a devaluation in the confidence in the government, in police, in the metro system in this case? And if that's the case, then we need to build that into our analysis and our solutions put forth as to where do we go from here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to kind of change direction a little bit and start talking about kind of where we go from here, and what are some of the things that we can do to continue to improve the safety. So I know that Gina, you've already mentioned some of the things, your layered approach and so on. But there's also, the MTA board, there's the mayor, there's all kinds of players here. So I'd like to kind of open it up to all of you. Where do you see the role of the MTA board? Where do you see the role of the mayor in all of this?
I'll jump in on that just briefly. I think the role of the MTA board, the role of the mayor, and the role of all of our elected leadership is to speak up on what the needs of public safety are, what the expectations of the public are. And in recent years, we haven't seen that. We have not seen our police supported by elected officials to the degree that they have a right to. The public's expectation, as I mentioned in the prior response, was one of futility. That why would I call the police if nothing's going to be done? Even if they make the arrest, that the person's not going to be filed on and prosecuted. And then with some of the other issues we're seeing, and you can argue cost benefit, but zero bail and cite outs. When you cite people out, give them a ticket. The chances of them taking care of that ticket is probably not high. When there's zero bail, they may go to the station and get booked, but then they're released and they're back out again in the same environment that they just left. So in an environment where people are not there all the time, but they're traveling from one place to another, but generally they're on the system going to and from at roughly the same time each day. And if they reported and went to the trouble of making a formal report the day before, and that same person is back doing the same stuff again day after day, the chances of them reporting that again, putting themselves in that position, are not real high. And so the confidence in the system, the confidence in police is diminished as a result of the lack of action by the system.
Before we continue on this thread, there was one thing I actually wanted to ask Gina, and that is that being the researcher here on the group, what we know from kind of historical transit data is that when people perceive that the system is not safe or is uncomfortable, et cetera, the discretionary riders, the people who have a choice, choose not to use the system. And the people who have no choice continue to use the system. Do you have any data at this point of who's back? And do you see any indication that the nature of who's riding the system is different?
Well, I can tell you from recent experience where we had an increase in ridership by 180,000 during the 6-day Taylor Swift event. So we had Swifties and their mothers and guardians or dads, using our system in order to go to SoFi. We're also seeing, like I said, I mentioned that our ridership is at 96% up pre-pandemic because people, with the regional connector opening, people are going to downtown and using the metro in order to be able to go downtown and enjoy all of the different things that downtown offers. So we are seeing new people coming onto the system, and we're working to maintain that and encourage people to come back. But I would say that we're working hard in order to be able to make it so that people want to choose Metro as their first choice in transportation. So that's something that we're working toward, especially with the Olympics coming in 2028.
Okay. And, I'm sure there's something to be said about, the one-time user, the person to SoFi versus the person who's on there every day, right? I
would say yes, but again, these are people, whether they're the people coming back or they're people who are trying it for the first time and want to use it a second time. So really, I think it's inspiring to see the numbers coming back from the pre-pandemic levels, and as well as us working really hard to make the system safe and increasing the perception of safety by hiring 327 transit ambassadors to assist in wayfinding and any other questions that may be had. We've increased the number of transit security officers by 96 so far this year. We've also increased our contract security, working very closely with our law enforcement partners. So really working together, and it's a very, very tight layered approach that we use so that the people who are addressing certain things, whether it be crime or cleanup issue, that we have the right people doing the right thing so we can have people throughout the system to assist our riders and make them feel more safe when they're riding Metro.
Now let's go to something that I think has been in the news a fair amount, and that is the idea of returning to the model of MTA having its own police force. And I'm sure all of you have something to say about that. So, this has been discussed and debated and all that stuff. I'd love to hear all your perceptions or views on should MTA go private. I'll call it just it's not really private, but go on its own.
Well, I just want to jump in here for a second, because I want to answer your last question, and I think we can make it a bridge to this question about what the mayor and the board can do. So first off, Mayor Karen Bass has promised that she would create a fairless system. And a lot of individuals who are very security oriented feel that going fairless will allow for people on the system, I think Gina alluded to it, people who use it as shelter. And, obviously not having a home is not a crime, right? If you can ticket somebody for fare evasion, it's a way to keep certain people out of the system. So, right, as the mayor moves forward, there's going to be this tension about whether we create fairless or not. And I think one way that Metro hopes to resolve it, and I'm sure like Gina, you can answer this, but is through creating transit police, because there has been a lot of criticism that the sheriff, the LAPD, and the Long Beach Police Department, intentionally or not intentionally, ticket more African Americans, or that some of their tactics aren't in line with sort of the friendlier police, that they're usually out there on the street, in the jails, and that the tactics may be too harsh for the Metro. So Metro board has talked about creating a new transit police that is culturally in line, and I'm sure Jim can speak to all the difficulties about creating a transit police. So I think all these three things are going forward at the same time. And at least from my perception, Metro is hoping to create a system that more people will come down to ahead of the Olympics. A system that's supposed to be a car-free Olympics. And part of the transit or part of the programming is creating ways to get to and from events like ones at SoFi Stadium. And people have told me that the Taylor Swift concert, the Super Bowl, those are all dry runs. So yes, those are one-time events, but those are also sort of getting ready for what's coming up next. So I just thought I'd lay
Very
out.
nice. Very, very well said. Very, very nice. So yes, that's a great framing. And so let's go back to the policing issue. I think Jim, you have something to say about it.
Yeah, sure. I look at that and we talk about Taylor Swift or the Super Bowl or any of the other major events that people have used the system for. I think that shows what can be done, but that's max deployment of public safety resources to ensure the safety for a big event like that. In order to be able to do that on a daily basis, the amount of people necessary is far beyond what the capacity is to do that now. When I look at the conversation about creating a Metro Police Department, my hope is that we all work together to be able to hash that out, and we don't do it in a vacuum, that we look at our past experience. We had the RTD police, Rapid Transit District Police, years ago, and we then went to the MTA police, the transition there, and then further transition, I think it was 1993 or so, when it was split up between LAPD and LASD. When you look at creating a public safety organization like this, first of all, it's going to have to be of substantial size. You're dealing with salaries, your benefits, the communication system, the equipment, the vehicles, the training that goes into that. And so there's an awful lot ramp up time necessary to be able to get all of that in control. There's a considerable amount of expense in putting together a department like this. Right now, with recruitment as tough as it is across the country for police agency, the transit system is going to feel that pain, and maybe more so, because a lot of people who are young and looking to get into law enforcement aren't necessarily looking to get into the specialty of transit policing. And so that's something that would have to be made more attractive in whatever way possible in order to be able to compete with municipal agencies, state agencies, and others. The necessity of the time that it would take to be able to put this together, recruitment, the retraining, post-certification, and then when you get people on board, how do you ensure the stability that they're not using this opportunity as a training ground to go to another department somewhere else? And I think those are realities that need to be talked about before we go down this road. And then the public perception. How do they view this new department? How do they view ambassadors or private security operators that are operating within the system? And I think that's something we all need to work together on. And whether the MTA board's decision is ultimately to go with their own police agency again, or to use other police agencies as is currently the model, I think a lot of work needs to be done to foster greater collaboration, greater resource deployment to be able to address the issues that we're dealing with, the ability for police officers who are deployed to be able to affect quality of life issues. We have people currently injecting drugs into themselves on the system, and there's not much in the way of penalties attached to anybody who's confronted for doing that. So as long as you have the tools not or lacking for the people who are out there employed to do this job, you're going to have frustration within the ranks. You're going to have frustration from the riding public. And then, as I mentioned before, it's an ecosystem where anything that happens in the system happens on the streets and vice versa. And so it's critical that we all work together to come up with the best solution possible, whatever that is determined to be.
Gina, I'm sure you've been thinking about it.
So a couple of months ago, the board had asked us to create an implementation plan in the event we do decide to go forward with this public safety department. And a lot of the things that Sheriff McDonnell has talked about, we are looking into right now. And so we should be going back to the board in January to provide the results that we to them so they can make the decision.
Any previews?
No.
I thought I could try. Okay, I want to go back to one of the things, and before I do that, I'm just going to say we're going to go to Q&A pretty soon, and I'll encourage our audience to keep on with the questions. We've got a fair number of them already, so I am watching, and I'll be throwing out as many to the panel as we possibly can in the time that we have. But before we do that, I want to go back to a point that Rachel made, and that is that there's this tension. There's lots of tensions, but one tension is that the concerns that we have about sort of fair and equitable policing, let me put it that way, what should LA Metro's role be in terms of addressing these problems of, for example, people using trains as their homes or train stations as their homes, and having the drug problems, et cetera. Is there a role? I mean, I know that Metro has been trying, but kind of, Rachel, from what you've been seeing out there, what is your perception?
What is my perception about Metro's role in
yeah, in these issues that are larger than Metro,
right?
Basically.
Well, I think, Metro's really having to look at itself right now. And I think there's some in there who have asked, are we a social service agency or what are we? For context, the Metro board is made included in the Metro Board is 5 of the supervisors who oversee a lot of the social services in the county. And over the past couple years, as Metro has tried to grapple with the individuals on there using drugs or that are using it to live, they've subsidized shelter. They've had people out, social services out there for people who need homes. There are people who are using drugs. I mean, they have really taken on a very different role than taking people from point A to point B and really re-examining some of the things that they're doing. And I think one of the people pointed out here listening was the infrastructure. I mean, one big issue in Metro is like the trains were never built with bathrooms. So people are going to the bathrooms on the train. And so there's a lot of questions about whether the way Metro functioned previously works now, and how far do they want to go in being partners of social service or doing additional work.
Thank you. Yeah. And where I'd like to go from there is something that, again, is kind of the academic view of the world, I guess, but all of this costs money. And, the money that you're putting into policing, which is an operational expense, is money you're not going to put somewhere else in operations. And the operational budget is not endless. In fact, it's highly constrained at this point. Then we take on the concept of free fare. And while I think the share is something like 7% of operating money is coming from fares, still it's a multi-billion-dollar system. So 7% is a lot of money. So any thoughts from anybody on, how do we make these decisions in a very cost-constrained environment?
I'll just throw out, and if the numbers I have are accurate, and I'll defer to Gina on that, the overall MTA budget's about $9 billion. And of that, 172 million is the public safety budget to patrol the whole system. And so while that's a lot of money, it certainly is not a great percent of the overall the overall budget numbers. And what's the right number? I'm not sure of that, but I know for a system spread out as big as it is, as Gina talked about, just the square miles and everything involved in the service area, we need to have enough people out there, bolstered by ambassadors, private security, and whoever else can be helpful. But we need to have enough people who are ready to respond to an incident, able to take appropriate action, and then that the appropriate follow-up will be made from that. So as far as what's the appropriate percentage of the budget that should be dedicated to public safety, I don't have that answer. I know what it is generally in municipalities. This system is certainly very different from a municipality, but I think we need to take a serious look at how we deploy public safety personnel throughout the system to ensure that people who are looking to be riders have a comfort level that when they go and engage in this activity, that it's going to be one where they're going from point A to point B in a safe manner, and one where them or their kids are not exposed to people injecting drugs or defecating or doing some of the other things that are so common on the system.
So Gina, I'm sure that you've been at this a lot and trying to look at it. And right now it seems like you're taking the approach of kind of targeting, where the worst problems are. That's where you're putting most of your resources, right? And then kind of going out from there. Do you have an idea of, sort of what it would take if we were to kind of overwhelm the system for a short period of time? To sort of see if you could get some of these problems resolved and then kind of back off? Have you kind of thought about those kinds of strategies?
Well, so as far as targeting, we have had our campaigns. We had a drug-free campaign that started on February 13th, and then we had a supplemental campaign that we did on the Red Line in April, May, and June. However, now we have a system-wide planned layered approach deployment where we address the entire system in a strategic and methodical way. Also, we're looking at our buses as well by increasing the number of transit security officers that we have to be on the bus lines. We also have law enforcement on our buses. So the approach that we're taking is very strategic. We have been able to bring crime down, and that allows us to really look at the entire system and deploy our resources in a strategic way, and that has been working.
There are some social justice advocates who say that we should just end these contracts with police departments, that they're very expensive, that money could best be used towards operations or towards social services or towards ambassadors or other areas, more frequent buses that might make it feel safer, and instead rely on the law enforcement agencies if there is an emergency. So, if somebody's going to pass out and you call the fire department, which frequently happens in metro trains, you don't have firemen just sitting there waiting. You have them on call, and that's a lot more cost effective than having them in a station. And so that's what some people think Metro should do.
That's an interesting idea, except I guess my first reaction would be some of these things happen so quickly that you don't have the 3 minutes that the fire department does.
Yeah, that's a totally reactive posture, relying on response time to be immediate, relying in a system this big, unrealistic. And so I look at probably some well-intentioned people voicing their opinions on this, but completely uninformed.
Well, this has been great discussion, and we could go on, but I have a ton of questions in the Q&A. And so with the permission of the panelists, I'd like to start reading off some questions. Good for everyone? I'm going to start with one from Eduardo. How is crime at the associated parking lots being addressed? Are there stats on those crimes?
So the way that we approach that is, again, we want to put the right resource for the right issue. And so we have contract security officers who are patrolling our parking structures 24/7. I do not have the exact crime stats right now for the parking garages.
There are actually two questions that have a reference to transit gangs. Does anybody have information or can speak to transit gangs? That is to say, the groups of people who either get on buses or trains together to, I'm going to say, either harass or commit some crime.
I'm not familiar with transit gangs. However, we, just looking at the various crimes that have taken place on our system, and the fact that we are a reflection of the county that we transit through, I am sure, and that we do have the various gang problems or a gang-associated crime that bleeds into our system.
Yeah, there are. In reference to the term gang, as far as that goes, there are members of street gangs that then take the subway and continue their criminal activity in the system as well as they do on the street. And then there's crews, robbery crews. We see burglary crews. There's all sorts of groups of people that come together to take advantage of other people. And certainly the system is not immune from that.
Here's a question to put all of us on the spot. I get the sense that none of our panelists today actually use public transit here in LA. What would it take to get each of us, to actually ride the rails and buses to work and recreation?
I do ride the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you are riders.
Well, I write it. I don't write it regularly, but I write it, a couple of times, 3 or 4 times a month for work, mostly. And part of it is a lot of the criticisms I have about the system. If I wanted to take a bus to the grocery store, it would take me about 30 to 40 minutes from where I'm at. So it's just a matter of efficiency that I think are part of some larger areas of the system, but I don't live in a high density area where there's a lot of availability of public transit.
And Gina?
No, I'm out on the system. I'm out talking to all of the different layers within our safety and security ecosystem. So yes, I do go out into the system. My office is right there at Union Station. So yes, in order for me to have a really good understanding as to what's going on in the system, I need to go out and see it. So that's something that I do, as well as my staff, where we all spend time out on the system to see what needs to be fixed, see what's going well, and make decisions based on that.
And Jim?
Yeah, I don't routinely take it now. I did, as sheriff, I stayed abreast of what was going on in the system. As a young person growing up back east in Boston, that was my public transportation, was my mode of travel. We didn't have a car for much of my childhood, and we took the transportation system everywhere. The difference today is that when you get on the system, again, things are unpredictable. There are people acting out on there, and there's a feeling of discomfort as far as not knowing what's going to happen next. In years past, there were consequences to behavior, and when people got on the train, you could rely on other passengers to come to your aid, particularly as a young kid, that you may or may not see today. And so, again, I think it goes back to all of us working together to demand that we have a safe system, and to ensure that we hold our elected officials accountable for doing things that are going to promote that.
And I will confess, I don't live in Los Angeles County, but I do, of course, work at USC, and I use the system for work-related travel when I can. Here's a question from Brian Taylor. Some of these crime or feelings of safety sound like infrastructure issues, not safety. Are there funds for cleaning crews and adding more bathrooms?
So, of course, safety, reliability, cleanliness, those are the things that they all tie together, especially when it comes to the feeling or the of safety. So yes, in fact, I think last year we significantly increased the number of our custodians and our service attendants. So yes, we are increasing that. As far as we also are looking at safety through environmental design, and I'm sure, Rachel has probably even reported this with regard to our MacArthur Park station. That had been a problematic station, and so we did a lot of different ideas and changed a lot of the environmental design in an effort to make it more safe.
Thank you. Here's lots of people, including USC students, are not reporting crime on the Metro because they say nothing is being done. What can be done to get more people to report crime?
We do have a Transit Watch app, and it's a way for our riders to be able to either text or call our Security Operations Center and report a crime. We highly, 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 highly recommend people report what they see. If they see something, say something so we can address those crimes.
And so just to push that a little, somebody reports and then what?
Someone reports it to our Security Operations Center, and then our layered approach, depending on what the situation is. If it's a cleanliness issue, our custodians are deployed to address the issue. If it's a safety issue, or that the transit security officers can address. So we have the right resources for the right issues. If it's a crime that is happening and law enforcement is warranted, then we will reach out to our law enforcement partners and ask them to address it.
Is there any feedback that's given back to the person?
There could be, because they have real-time texting with our Security Operations Center. So there is somebody on the other line 24/7, and they can have that conversation with our security operations specialists.
And have you seen any any increase in reporting?
I can tell you, actually, as a result of crime going down, we've had a decrease in complaints. However, we're always encouraging people, if they see something, to say something.
This is a question about the finances, actually, of Metro. Is Metro financially solvent based on fares? I pay taxes here and I don't feel safe riding. If the system isn't solvent, then my tax dollars might be going towards culturally aligning with crime-ridden trains. So this goes kind of back to is Metro fiscally capable of putting in the resources that would actually be necessary to put a big dent in people's perceptions? I'm not saying crime, but perceptions.
That's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
So I can tell you that our board is very, very supportive of safety and security on our Metro. And again, we've increased our law enforcement budget this year for fiscal year 24. We've increased the number of contract security officers. We've increased the number of transit security officers. We've stood up a ambassador program where we have 327 ambassadors out there across the system to help people when they need help. We also are tripling the number of homeless outreach teams that we currently have out working with the people experiencing homelessness to assist them in finding services. So Metro is investing in safety and security on the system, as well as cleanliness, by adding additional custodians and working on the environmental design to increase safety.
Very good. There's another question that comes to mind. There's a few references to it in these Q&As, and that is there something we can learn from other systems? So, Jim, you've been around for a long time. Rachel, I know you've been writing LA Metro, but you're a journalist, so you're probably hearing from other places too. Can we learn from somewhere else? There are things people are doing that we should be thinking about in LA.
I think we can learn a lot from other places. When you look at some of the transportation systems around the world, some of them are spotless, safe. The perception of safety is very high, and there's a very high confidence by the public in using those systems. And so all of the things that I think the public here in Los Angeles County expects are available around the world and could be available here in Los Angeles, but it would take a dramatic shift, I think, in mindset as to how we deploy, what our expectations are, what we're willing to tolerate in order for us to be able to get those kind of outcomes.
Well, those systems that you're mentioning are systems that are used by huge numbers of discretionary riders. Right. They have a much larger mode share overall. They're carrying 50% of the passive, the trips in some places. And if we kind of look at comparators in the United States, can we learn from them?
Absolutely.
What's New York doing? What's Chicago doing? What's San Francisco doing?
Well, I think San Francisco, that's in part where we got the ambassador program. It was largely modeled off what was done over in BART. Everybody's been taking different tactics. There's questions about sweeping trains at the end of the lines. I think that's what New York does. Metro has talked about how far they want to go in doing that. So there's definitely things you can take from other places. I think the ambassadors is a good example of that.
And we just had a safety summit where we invited, I think we had about 13 chiefs from other transit agencies come to Los Angeles at the end of June. And it was a 3-day summit where we talked about the different things, the different best practices that are working in other places, and also looking to adopt them here. So we are always working with different transit services to see what they're doing, and taking best practices. We have people calling LA to ask us about some of the things that we're doing. So yes, it is a small community, and we do talk to each other, and there are a lot of best practices out there that we can certainly learn from.
Okay, very good. We are, I think, right about at the time where each of you get to have a last word. And I get to thank you, of course, for participating in the panel. I want to also, before I even do that, I want to thank the participants of the webinar. There were a total of 40 questions. Some of them are actually very interesting stories of your own experiences. I hope we can record or keep some of the chat stuff. Giovanna, is that possible? Wherever you are?
Yes, absolutely. We will share all the questions and comments.
Okay, because there's some very, very interesting that I didn't have a time to read, but some very, very interesting experiences of people that I think should be part of this recording. Okay, with that, let's go to the last word. And I think I'll just start in the same order I introduced you. So Jim, you get your last word.
Sure, just a sincere thank you, Jen, for putting this together. I think it's something that needs to have continued conversation at all levels throughout the county to be able to come up with efforts that will work. The ability to put guardrails on behavior so that people can expect that when they get on this system, pay the fare, that they're going to be protected. They're going to get to where they're going safely, unaccosted. Rachel, thank you for your articles that brought attention to this. That went a long way. And Gina, wishing you the very best in a very, very difficult role moving forward. I hope that, again, as I said, that we can all work together and come up with solutions and strategies that, regardless of what the next generation configuration looks like for policing the system, that it's one that's effective and that people work together, and that ultimately the people who ride the system every day feel a level of comfort.
And Gina, you're next.
Yes, that was very well said. Thank you for having me. I just want everyone to know that we are working very hard at Metro, and we want to hear from you. We have, you can reach out to our customer service and let us know what your experiences are. And if you have issues or concerns, we would love to hear from you as well. Every complaint that comes in, we review them and we look at them. And many times I even reach out to the individuals who are having issues on our system, so I can learn more as to how we can do better. I just like to let everyone know that we have a commitment at Metro to have a safe, reliable, and clean and great customer experience for everyone. We recognize we have challenges, and we are working very, very hard to make Metro the place for people to choose to go where they need to go in the city.
And Rachel, you get the last word.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everyone. I really appreciate this. And I guess I just wanted to sort of pan back for a second. Metro is at a really pivotal moment. They do have a $9 billion budget, but they're looking for a massive expansion over the coming decades, and really trying to bring in people, trying to expand the ridership in a significant way is going to mean that they need to create a safe place where riders can come in. The taxpayers have put in a lot of money for this. And so I think that's one of the great expectations, but safety certainly is not the only one. People want a fast and efficient system that's easy to use. So this is like one piece of a larger puzzle that if Metro is going to be the great transit service that it really aspires to be, it's going to need to solve. And
that was perfect. We are just at 1 o'clock. Who could ask for more? Now I'm going to thank everybody one more time, and then I turn this over to Giovanna to close us out.
Yes, Thank you all so much for joining us. The recording will be available in a few days on the USC Price YouTube. Thanks.